City and urban planning. We've got a fantastic panel of 3 people. I'll introduce them briefly in a second. Then what I'll do is ask each of them a question. We'll start the discussion that way, and we'll open it up from questions from the audience. Maybe half an hour in, so that we can hear lots of voices, although I'd encourage you to ask questions rather than make statements. I'm Jane Frances Kelly. I'm the Cities Programme Director at the Grattan Institute. I've been doing that for about 2.5 years. And I also always like to clarify at this point, I've been in Australia 8 years. It doesn't sound like it. I guess it never will. I came here 8 years ago for 9 months, and here I am. So, our speakers this evening, Professor Rob Adams is a Director of City Design at the City of Melbourne. He's also a professorial Fellow of the University of Melbourne, and I enjoy embarrassing him in public every chance I get by saying that he's a hero of mine for the difference he's made to the city that I love. And that work was recognised in 2007 with an Order of Australia. Jill Garner has over 25 years in architectural practice and has taught at both RMIT and Melbourne universities. She continues to advocate for the importance of architectural design and innovation in her current guise of Associate Victorian Government Architect. Trevor Dance has lived next to Emu Bottom Homestead in Sunbury for the past 23 years. I've been looking forward to getting to say that. He has a long history of involvement in community groups and has been a green wedge activist since the late 90s. Welcome. So, like most Australian cities, Melbourne's expected to continue to significantly grow its population over the next few decades. And if we're going to absorb all these extra people, and we'll both be kind of, producing them, the people already in Australia will be producing them as well as kind of more people arriving through immigration. If we're going to absorb all those extra people while keeping the city a great place for all of its inhabitants, there's a lot of things we're going to have to get right, a lot of challenges. Where will we live and how? Where will we work and at what? And how will we get there? What kind of shape of city works well, and how would we develop in that direction? And how are we going to decide all this? So I'm going to ask each of our panellists to spend about 3 minutes speaking to a question I'm going to ask them. And I do exploit the charm of this accent to stop them if they go on and on. So, Rob, you've got an idea for how we should move forward. Can you tell us what you think we should be focusing on?
Thanks, Jane. I suppose I'd like to start by saying we can talk about the expansion of cities, but we need to put it into a timescale. Urbanisation is going to double the urban population in the world in the next 50 years. So we've got to build as much urban infrastructure in 50 years as we've built in the whole of civilization. I think that gives a different notion to how we deal with cities. And my interest comes back from thinking about when I was asked to talk about that up in Sydney some years ago, thinking back to the 1960s when baby boomers like myself hit the university system, and everybody started building more universities and expanding them. I went to university on the side of Table Mountain, I'm from Zimbabwe originally, that couldn't expand. It effectively had a growth boundary around it, which was a national park. And they had to think about how they catered with that problem. And what they did is knowing they couldn't expand, they did a study of how well they were using the stuff they already had. And the surprising revelation was that things like lecture theatres were being used for 17.5% of the time. So what they did is they didn't expand, they re-timetabled, and they only built the stuff they needed. And when I went back 30 years later, they'd doubled their student population from 4,000 to close to 8,000. And I thought for sure the campus was going to be ruined. There would be high-rise popping up all over the place. To my great pleasure, there wasn't. It was a low-rise campus, still designed originally by people like Herbert Baker. They'd taken out a road, they'd built on all the car parks, they'd intensified the campus. And to my joy as well, that campus was alive from 8 in the morning till late at night. My question, why couldn't you do that with a city? So the study we did was to say, rather than carry on expanding, because we know that's failing, and you just have to go and look at the vampire study done by Griffith University, will show you that the current system is failing.
Can you describe what the vampire index is?
It looks
People
at
may think it shows where vampires live.
Yeah, vulnerability to mortgage and petrol prices. Done in all the capital cities of Australia, one study in 2001, the other in 2006. What it shows up is we're creating two societies. One society that's actually out on the fringe, really battling, not because they haven't got good jobs, but just the sheer cost of getting to anywhere they want to go. So in looking at that, we said, well, let's have a look at Melbourne and ask the question, if we didn't expand the growth boundaries and if we didn't take up the green wedges, if we actually dealt with the land that we had, and this was prior to the 40,000 hectares that had just been set aside, what would that mean? And what it surprisingly showed us, and I'm happy to go into detail later, but is that if you put people close to railway stations and public transport, major bus routes and major tram routes, and on known redevelopment sites, you can get 4 million extra people in the city by only using 7.5% of the land, and you wouldn't have to build higher than 5 to 8 stories. You could save suburbia, and you could actually allow suburbia to be where we plant trees and put solar voltaics on our roof and capture water. You could save the green wedges because you wouldn't have to go near them. And you could actually create high streets close to where people live and possibly job opportunities. The other surprising thing is you'd mostly save $550 billion over 50 years by not having to rebuild the infrastructure. And this has happened in the centre of Melbourne. Central Melbourne, when I arrived here 25 years ago, had 40,000 people. We've now got 100,000 people. We haven't built too many roads.
That's
and
my next...
The rate in the dollar has dropped because we actually have got more people to pay for the facilities we provide. So we've just got to do more with less, and business as usual is failing us.
So you're the Director of Urban Design at the City of Melbourne, which, as you say, it's less than 100,000 people, and doesn't go much further than St Kilda Road and so on. How are we going to make this happen in the... you have no power over anything kind of outside the City of Melbourne's boundaries.
I think I'd like to think what City of Melbourne's been good at is as a demonstration of what can be done. So we built the first 6-star commercial office building to try and show people what that looked like. Currently going through committee last week were 2 amendments to the planning regime in central Melbourne that actually identified where we expect that growth to go. And it's in and around the CBD North, along Elizabeth Street and up towards the universities, and along the Moonee Ponds Creek on those sites. And our approach is that we follow that philosophy of saying where can we put new development of a mixed-use nature, so it's not just residential, it's a combination of jobs and residential. And I suppose we're leading by example and saying, I think it's contingent on local government to work out where that population is going to go. And if local government doesn't do it, other people are going to step in and impose it on them. And we're seeing that happen. So I think there's a real task here for local government to get their heads together and decide where you're going to fit these millions of people over the next few years so we don't destroy the amenity we love and the character of the city we've got. And we certainly don't destroy the green wedges and carry on destroying valuable farmland.
Thank you. So, Jill, as a society, we're getting older, and the kinds of households we're living in are changing. So less than half of Australian households now have children in it, although we often kind of imagine that, that's what all households are like. And the fastest growing type of household is a woman over 55 living on their own. What kind of buildings do we need to be building now?
I've seen some really interesting propositions for different types of housing, and I think that it's actually not just those that actually have different kind of family models. I'd go so far as to say that even those who actually have a traditional family with children don't actually necessarily need the type of back garden that we all grew up thinking that we needed, because the children are flat out doing so many things. I often wonder how much the land is actually used that people live in. But to sort of address the issue of the different type of households, obviously one of the things that is critical is to people's well-being is to feel part of a community. You tend not to feel like that if you're a single person rattling around in an isolated house with no connections into the community. And I think to build on the point that Rob really raised in the city of Melbourne, I see the most phenomenal number of opportunities within every suburb in Melbourne, where I see these gaps in the suburb where the people who actually occupy that suburb, who live in that suburb, who shop there, they actually have friends there, so they're already a part of that suburb. So they don't want to move, and I understand that. But there are a lot of gaps in the suburbs, and I believe that there are different housing models that those people would be really interested in. And I'm not a big advocate for high-rise. I believe in the ground plane, and I do think that, I'm speaking sort of outside the city centre here, because I believe that density can be achieved on an extremely accessible level, on a much smaller height scale than that, because it's about footprint on the block of land, and it's about interactions. And some of the more interesting projects that I've seen actually propose shared amenity on the site. So there might be smaller residences, there might be 8 residences on a site, and there might be a shared dining room that people can rent out or just put their name against if they're going to have a dinner party for 20. And I've said this before, I've seen models. There's a model from the 30s and 40s in Melbourne which just didn't really take off, and I think it's a fantastic model that should be revisited.
So over the last 10 years, 70% of the housing that has been built in Melbourne has been family-sized detached houses, and in the greenfield areas where it's been over 90% have been large detached houses. How are we going to be able to shift what developers supply or build? It's not an easy question.
That's a huge question. I think part of it is the ease of building. You know, there's a lack of requirement for permits. You know, building on those blocks of those empty sites that I'm talking about is really hard. You've got neighbours, you've got people who are happy with their existing condition and don't want it changed. And I always think that's an interesting thing itself, because I live in St Kilda, and the status quo in St Kilda is extraordinarily different from the status quo in Camberwell. And we're all talking about different things when we say we don't want change. But the reality is that there is a population in that particular area that has a perception that density is okay.
And St Kilda's the second densest neighbourhood in Melbourne, in fact.
Yeah.
South Yarra is the densest.
Yeah, and look, I occupy St Kilda. My life is basically lived within St Kilda, and I can see so many empty places in St Kilda that could be kind of occupied by those who don't want to move out of the area.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Trevor, you introduced yourself to me as a grassroots activist, and as somebody who works in a think tank that's located off a laneway in Carlton, I'm probably the opposite of that. So you're the right person to ask this question. Do you think we're getting the balance right between, you know, sort of growing the city and protecting the environment?
Well, simple. Excuse me. Firstly, I'm not used to this, so bear with me. First time for me. The answer to that is no. Grassroots is what I am. I've been involved with Greenwedge, as you said, for about 10, 12 years when it first started. And every year things change, with the governments keep changing their minds and plans. And when you look at the environment, and I was a bit naughty today, I was allowed to do there's a few handouts there, a few pictures you might look at and ask some questions later. And that's regards, from our own. I'll give you an example, environment of lately, that I had to personally get a consultant to do a flora study to show that the council study was flawed. It's pretty poor that an average Joe Blow had to go out on Christmas Eve to do it before they burnt the property. And the outcome of that was that 40% more native grasslands was found that was on the report, plus an endangered species was found. So I've got a bit of disrespect for the government as far as they don't do proper analysis of all these growth areas. The councils can't be trusted as our guarding as such through there. And everywhere we turn, there's some pictures there, you'll see the hilltops have been bulldozed, the valleys have been cut out, all for no reason. As the colleagues here on the panel, because I've never met these people before, and it seems they're on the same sort of wavelength in a way that The urban area has got plenty of space now for our forward projections, which is what the statistics show anyhow. Dick Hamer, all the way back in those early days when the greenweeds came about, and wanted the greenweeds there to be the lungs of our city. And if you go and drive around now, you see a lot of hills covered with houses or desolate and all that because of really, I suppose, I'm going a bit away from the environment, but developers see cheap land out there, a cheap way of doing it. And the next problem with that obviously flows on from the cheap land and all that the houses are built with no infrastructure. So there's an infrastructure you see tries to follow later on. I'm just talking openly here. I mean, the recent case of Hume Council is they've got a joint venture. There's council land which could be used where this native grass is, and they reckon 390 houses is a great idea there. Purely for the sake of getting $25 million there. It's thinking about greed, not thinking about the environment, whereas you've got an asset there, could be great open spaces, parklands, which we're lacking out in the outer suburbs now, and believe it or not, even though we've got all this nice open space out there, it's all owned by private people, not many by the councils. And as you know, I mean, the greenweeds, we're up to about nearly 50,000 hectares now in the last 10 years that has been lost with the urban growth moving out. And I must say, and I'm ducking a weaver here, but as of tonight at 5:02 p.m, I got an email from Peter Seaman for the Growth Authority, and in there there's actually, I opened up and there was somebody discovers a brand new town centre planned for Sunbury, and I'm thinking, where's the consultation? It's just happened on the book tonight. And leading to consultation, those people out there who've been trying to protect their environments and the growth areas and all that, there is no consultation. They say it, just like the Windsor Hotel up here a few years ago. They tick the box, but nothing actually happens. And it's closed shop now for the normal Joe Blows like us. And in fact, even though we want to get information about developments now to slow them down, it all comes back to freedom of information. My last one cost me $2,500, my own money, to get information in which to go out there and contest these developers and poor planning. Mafia guy, he knows what I think. Mafia guy won't even meet people anymore who's against his philosophies on where they're going with the urban growth boundary. In fact, I've been banned from meetings with him. Isn't that sad? He doesn't like having someone there who tells him as it is, even though he came to my house a few years ago saying, "Oh, look after this area." And then you go down. Well, someone mustn't. Same experience by the sounds of it. And then you look at even in my own backyard a few years ago, we had to go to VCAP. You think that Emu Bottom Homestead, those who might know, it's the oldest homestead in Victoria. Heritage overlay on it, all protected, to look over the place. Council supported a 10 lot or 8 lot, whatever it was, subdivision right up to the boundaries of the most historical homestead in Victoria. And who had to fight it? Us residents again. We won in the end because we made it not financial, but you look from our sort of level, it took us 3 full days of hearings with 2 commissioners against 2 solicitors, one for the applicant and one for the council, to try and stop these things.
But it worked, which sounds great. And I mean, actually, that's what I'm going to ask each of you next before I open it up. This issue can sometimes feel quite overwhelming. There's an enormous amount of understandable anxiety about it. It seems like kind of a big challenge and so on. Do you think we're making progress at the moment? Do you think that are you optimistic? Do you think we're going to head towards making the kind of tough decisions we need to make?
I think you can take that in 2 ways. I think there is a change occurring that is mostly in line with the strategy I articulated. That people are realising the cost of actually living on the fringe, and it's becoming harder and harder for developers to sell those. And many developers are going offshore now to sell properties like that. So you could say that the trend for intensification is already there. Last year, I think almost half of the starts, just under half of the starts, were for apartments. But at the other scale, I think we're failing, to convince the community to have faith in us as government. I think they've lost faith because we've broken that faith too often. And I don't think we are articulating a way out of the dilemma that everybody's in. And they're having to fight it, as Terry just said, on individual sites. And so the developers are cherry-picking sites. So we won't win it until we get a commitment that I think's got to come not only from state government, from federal governments, to recognise that cities are the biggest issue that civilisation faces at the moment. It's not just about money, it's about sustainability, and it's about the social fabric of our cities. And since more than half of us, and 80%, live in cities, where is the Minister for Cities? Who actually coordinates all this? It doesn't happen. So we've got to start taking cities seriously. We've got to have a strategy that actually leads us to agreement as a community as to what we will do over the next 40 or 50 years. And once you've got that agreement as a community, then maybe you don't have to defend every site, because you would have had a debate around where you think growth should take place and where it shouldn't. Have a debate about food. 85 million hectares of land have gone under concrete or subdivision around cities since the 1980s, mid-1980s. And that's prime farmland. Most of our produce comes from, I think Jill was talking behind, within about 30 kilometres of the centre of the city. And we're just burying it under concrete.
Yeah, and this kind of real community engagement in the issues and in the future has been done elsewhere. So often when I talk to kind of local councillors, they're just like, but it's terrible. People get upset and they think that people that live in flats are criminals, and all of this kind of thing. And so it's, you can do this very badly, very easily. But there's an excellent Grattan Cities programme report called "Cities Who Decides" that talks about where it's been done successfully elsewhere. It's not rocket science. It does take some balls, though.
It does.
Yeah.
And courage, I think, is one of the things that sometimes
that's what I meant.
We lack.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, you get guys like Henri Penaloza in Bogota, who comes into power and basically says, I'm not going to spend a single dollar on the motor car for the time I'm in office. So he builds, pedways, bike paths, rapid bus, parks, schools, and drops the crime rate in Bogota by 85%, and goes out of power as the most popular Lord Mayor.
Yeah.
So it does take courage, and I think that's a challenge that our politicians need to face up to.
Yeah, meatballs. Jill, are you
I was just going to say it also takes perhaps a change of headset on the part of the community, because the reality is the community is actually buying and is kind of demanding, by the sound of it as well, from what I hear. The developers say they're just catering for what people want, and it's not, therefore it's not up to us to change what people want.
There's another excellent Grattan report that shows that that's not really what's happening, but yeah.
I think, from my point of view, really, and I guess one of the things at the Government Architect's Office we really push is that issue of what makes a really good environment in terms of living in it. And the green spots are actually, really scientifically proven to make the air better, to decrease pollution, to increase oxygen, all of those sorts of things. So there's actually real scientific evidence to say, we really do need open space. So I think that, and people need to understand the impact on health and the fact that they get in their car every time they go anywhere. I think that is a huge issue that needs to be tied into people's slight change of headset around what they want. The other thing that I think is interesting also is in youth. What I see in a lot of the outer suburbs is that those huge blocks of land are actually occupied by 4 cars. As the family grows up and as the kids want it's the first focus that those children have the minute they turn 18 is they get a car. And it's about independence, it's about being able to kind of leave home. And that worries me that is so essential to get independence if you live a long way out of the CBD or a long way from the transport network. You need a car.
That you have to have a car. And as Rob said earlier, the Vampire Index shows that that's where many households are most vulnerable to increases in petrol prices.
So
it just increases your kind of the level of risk that you have to live with in your life. Because
a whole lot of other stuff comes with it.
So Trevor, you told the story about the Emu Bottom, and it's not just because I wanted to say that again, the Emu Bottom homestead I mean, that was a success, right? I mean, you had to fight and so on, but you saved it.
It was a success only because you managed to get the lot sizes, the number reduced. Because we obviously proved Melbourne water studies and floods are all flawed as they normally are. Yeah. So that got rid of a couple of sites that made it not financially viable as we speak. So it's a win by default, but it's a win as far as being concerned because no development has occurred. Yeah. But I might just take some points there about what the community demands are. Well, that local one I was talking about recently over the last few years, I mean, we had 1,000 people sign a petition in 24 hours saying they don't like us. So I think the developers know exactly what the community do know in some occasions.
You don't think that's just about change? Because that's kind of a difficult thing to try and work out. Is it just about change?
No, it's not about change. It's a matter where specific sites are being located, and some things are just a grab for money, and others, they don't think that there's better forward thinking. I mean, the councils come out and say, "Oh, this is going to be the world's best project ever developed," but they're going to put a retail centre on top of a hill looking out over the Jackson Valley where the potables are. So the public know that makes no sense in its own right there.
Also, if people are not being engaged in talking about what kind of city we want in the future and what kind of life we want to be able to live in it, then their only opportunity for using their voice is on a project by project basis, and so they can,
And the consultation process, you say, their consultations normally these days they don't have sessions like this. They put a couple of boards up in a tent at a local show, and they tell you what they're going to do. And so that's consultation.
That doesn't work as consultation.
No, I'll tell you, we get a whole session on consultation. And then as far as 4 cars out on property, well, obviously we live out on property, and obviously that's an issue with transport. But then again, the developers develop out those places. It's all about putting money into infrastructure, and the government should enforce infrastructure before development goes ahead in any case. Then these problems wouldn't exist, and that's an issue. But as you're saying, I think you've got to look at Matthew Guy's 2 Supreme Court cases he's going to fight in the next month or two, and obviously there's backdoor deals being done with developers, and for us, the community can't get in the front door to even talk to him about some common sense. That's my political statement for tonight.
I'm feeling deprived. I'll give him my address if he wants. I'm going to give the audience a 2-minute warning that we'll come and kind of start asking you questions. So if you can start thinking, I'll turn around in a couple of minutes, and if you could put your hands up. When you do, again, please let me beg you to to ask a question and to be not unsuccinct. And if you feel comfortable, then tell us who you are just before you but you don't have to if you think that's. So in a couple of minutes, who's got the most burning?
A couple of issues. One, Jill raised health. I mean, a very interesting stat is someone who drives a car to go to work will mostly spend 7 minutes a day walking or exercising. Someone who actually catches public transport will get up to 40 minutes. And, we've got an obesity bill in Australia of $58 billion. So a lot of these things are interrelated. The 4 cars, each of those cars is potentially round about $20,000 a year if you take everything, depreciation, cost, parking, the whole lot. To expect families to pay that is ridiculous. And the last thing is that we never talk about our demographics. The one demographic in Australia that's going down is mum and dad and 2 kids. All the rest are 2-people family or single families. We've got a completely different change in demographics, not only in the composition of families, but in the age. If you look at the age statistics, us guys, who are the baby boomers, are this big bubble at the end with nothing ready to support it coming on.
And you want to have a comfortable retirement?
Well,
that's good.
I might not be able to retire, but because there'll be a skill shortage, and hopefully people will stay in the workforce. But I think what we've got to look at, and the reason I quote those few, is I think we've got to look at the trends. Because we can have a debate about hearsay and things like that, but if you put all the trends together, what they tell us unequivocally is that you cannot go on building the cities we build the way we're building them today.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, and it's going to have a social, financial, and environmental impact, let's start having a sensible debate around the facts rather than the emotions.
Yeah, and about what people actually want rather than what we are guessing that they want. Right. And what they want in a kind of a realistic scenario.
They may not know they want it at the moment. I guess that's my point too, is that there's still a lot of education to be done about the real issues, about the health issues, about the environmental issues.
Or I mean, even we ask people, what kind of trade-offs would they like to make between what kind of house they live in, what size it is, where it is, the location of the house, and within their budget constraint. And it turns out that we don't all want the same thing. We want a mixture of things. It turns out it's a liberal democracy. It's not North Korea. I don't know why we're surprised.
I mean, when we actually started that program in the early 1990s of bringing people back into central Melbourne, if I was told once, I was told 100 times, Australians don't like to live in cities.
It won't work.
And we said, have you asked them? And so when it was actually provided, surprise, surprise, a lot of them wanted it.
Yeah.
So it's not the answer for everyone, and it's not one size fits all.
Yeah, yeah.
But sometimes we don't actually offer people the alternative.
Yeah. Can I have a first question, please? Okay, there's a lady here in the fourth row in the middle, followed by a gentleman about 4 rows behind that, and then the gentleman right up the very back.
Hi, I'm Jill Pope. I'm an anthropology student. I'm actually just interested. I mean, I can see that there's 4 people there from very disparate areas, a think tank, community activists, state government and local government. I just wanted to know if there were any strategies for you guys to kind of band together to take on, the GAA, the federal government, the developers, or whoever needs their kind of minds changed, and argue with them on their own terms, whether that's economic, social, or cultural. And if there are plans, what are those strategies? Like Rob was saying, a minister for cities or something.
Can I have a little go on this? I agree with you. When I was asked to come to this, being scared shitless, I would say, to come and talk in front of all these people today, and that went through my head. That's a little. Well, here's an opportunity, Trevor, to go and meet different people and hear different views, which I heard out the back there. And I think that was a great idea. But when you present it to the government or the councils, that they're not interested. That maybe I'm working with my new colleague over here. We've got a few good ideas here, and I think it's a great idea. And people who are in the know, because I'm grassroots, we know what we're suffering through and how hard the bureaucracy is to get through to someone who deals with it every day. I think it's a great idea, and maybe you might accept the challenge to join up with me.
Look, I think there are strategies, maybe not enough. The piece of work that I've been quoting from was something that came out of a discussion between the Department of Transport, interesting, not planning, and ourselves to deal with, what is the capacity of the city. There are a lot of other studies, studies done by the Grattan Institute. There's, for the first time, I'm pleased to say, at the World Economic Forum, a group of people who are starting to try and put cities on the agenda at that national level. I think communities are starting to understand the imperative. Put aside the social aspects. If we don't fix up cities in terms of their environmental outcomes, we're in real trouble. 75 to 80% of the greenhouse gases come out of cities. So if we're going to solve that as an issue, it's going to come out of city strategy. So I'm optimistic, but people accuse me of always being optimistic. I think the strategies are starting to emerge and come together, and I think there's a dialogue, as is being had here this evening, where like minds are coming together to think about how do you solve this problem. New housing forms. We now are seeing a return to prefabrication, factory-built units, not of the 1960s type, which were the Housing Commission, but highly sophisticated ones that go together and can be erected in a couple of weeks to get 8 stories in the central city. It was done about 10 months ago. So I think there's a groundswell moving in this direction.
Great. Yes, and then the gentleman right up the back, and then this lady right down here.
Yep, thank you. My name is Ian Penrose. One of the questions being asked of the forum tonight is how will we ensure a bigger Melbourne is a better Melbourne? Perhaps bigger cannot be better, whether it's going up or out. Wherever people live, they require more infrastructure, more hospitals, more schools. They use more resources, whether they're food, water or energy, and they create more congestion and health problems. More people means more crowding. Should we seriously consider another option is that Melbourne doesn't get bigger? Discussion about stabilising Melbourne's population, as I'd like to ask that, please.
Who's game to answer that one? I will.
Jill? Yeah, you go ahead.
I'm not sure if I can answer that.
Look, it's a topic people won't approach because we are in the driest continent of the world and we do have limitations. I mean, I live out past Sunbury. It was in 1999 or whatever. The Sunbury's about to be dry out of water. We had to, through the government, get a pipeline built straight away, joining up to Melbourne Water. So I've seen in the recent 10 years that the environment can't cope with huge growth. I think maybe the economic times now might slow down some of our growth, possibly, with obviously what's happening around there, because we obviously have a large immigration depot being here in Melbourne. A lot of families come here. But at some stage, as we're saying, that the leaders of this country, and no one's going to say, hey, we want to stop population, we don't want to stop immigration because it'll be all bad. But at some stage, it's a finite line that the world can substantiate with population.
I'm not sure whether any studies have been done on whether our infrastructure is at 100% usage. And, Rob talked about the fact that, at the university example, where if you've got something that is occupied for 20% of its time or used for 20% of its capacity, it's still got 80% that can be kind of added to it. So I guess my suggestion really is that there are these holes. You're talking physically and population-wise. And I guess that's fine if our existing infrastructure, and I'm talking sewers, drains, water supply, those sorts of things, if that is at 100% or 95%, then yes, we can't go any further, but is it? And I guess if it's not, then it should be.
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of quick things as well. I think it's important to be realistic when talking about this, and short of sterilising all the women and building a big wall, I'm not sure how you do stop population growth, and that's quite hard in a liberal democracy. And then the other thing is that we very often we tend to imagine that change is always going to be bad. Melbourne is twice the size that it was in, say, the early 70s, and I think most people would say that Melbourne's a better city than it was in the early 70s, and we're twice the size. Then the last thing I'd say is the consequences of not changing and sort of stopping migration and so on is that we won't be able to support the population as it gets older. The economy will, kind of stop benefiting from the skills of migrants who arrive, and the place could well stagnate. And I'm focusing on that because I think that sort of too often we don't consider, the consequences of stopping or of doing nothing. All right, the gentleman up the back, and then this lady down here at the front.
Hi, I wrote a thesis in greyfield development last year and talking about filling the spaces in between, you spoke of earlier. The biggest conclusion I came up with, and not a new one at that, was that the tools that planners have aren't effective in dealing with these issues. We've got a non-strategic, non-spatial system.
A strategic, non-spatial system?
No, a non-strategic, non-spatial system, like the planning...
Sorry.
Planning schemes are based on permit approval and not, say, the use and the
There's a lady down here who would like to know who you are.
I've just finished a Masters at Melbourne University in urban planning. Okay. I just wrote a thesis last year in this.
Doesn't matter.
I think she might like you. I think that's she really is after your name. That's fine. If you would like to come and introduce yourself at the end, I think she'd appreciate that.
Just if you care to comment on that. Our system is based on permit approval, and that our planners don't have the tools to deliver these goals that we're talking about.
Yeah, no. I mean, I wouldn't mind a quick go at that myself. When we published The Housing We Choose last June, which shows that there's a huge mismatch between what Australians say they want when you actually ask them, and what is being built and what we have, we then did another piece of work which we published in November that took a look at, well, how could we shift that? How could we get more of the housing that we want? And so, there's a series of recommendations in there about real community engagement, because it's the only thing that works. Actually kind of involving the community and making the decisions, not making the decision and then telling them.
Can you send a copy to Hume Council, please?
Yes. Yes, I'll send another copy to Hume Council. we proposed for areas who might be interested in taking in more households by changing the kind of mix of housing that they have, a thing called neighbourhood development corporations. And then the one that kind of really relates to what you're talking about is we said that where there's, a lot of what is built in established areas happens at a very kind of small scale. It's, it's one lot on a street or, two lots at the corner or so on. At the moment, unless it's a detached house, a single dwelling, it has to go through the full planning system, which we know there are issues with around delays, and so much goes to VCAT. It costs a lot of money. Lawyers do very well. Nobody else is kind of very happy. So we kind of suggested that there should be a small redevelopment housing code. If anybody wants to come up with a nattier title for it, that would be great. Which basically says that if you're building something that is between 2 and 10 dwellings, is 2 stories or under, so we're not talking about high things, it's like 2 stories or under, and kind of fulfills a whole series of criteria that is designed to protect existing residents in that street, and is about the kind of things that existing residents quite correctly really worry about, like overshadowing and kind of preserving the character of the street and kind of setbacks and so on. As long as you kind of sort of are playing within all of those rules, then you shouldn't need to go through the planning system, and that would kind of make it much easier to build things that are 2 stories and under. Now there's a
sorry.
Yep.
I think the fundamental thing, and I agree with you. I think our current planning scheme is far from perfect and cumbersome. It's been incrementally added on to, over decades. It's lost the objective of where you want development and where you don't want development. And I think we're going to have to rebuild the planning schemes. And I think we're going to have to do them using the visualisation techniques that can show people what it is they're actually discussing and what they're talking about. Because, at the moment, the planning scheme is really cumbersome. If you want to get through, a major project through the major project part of VCAT at the moment, it's taking you to October. We won't have succeeded until we can get rid of VCAT. You shouldn't have to go to VCAT. Communities should be able to agree on what is reasonable and what is unreasonable. And it should be sorted out at that level. And the planning schemes aren't allowing us to do that at the moment.
Yeah, the current
so I think your point up the back is a good one, and something we should, needs to be looked at. Hopefully what we've just put on exhibition in Melbourne starts to go some way towards achieving that.
So the lady down here at the front, and then a gentleman at the back left.
Thank you. I'm Rosemary West, and I coordinate the Green Wedges Coalition, so I work with Trevor, but I'm also a councillor. And I guess I'm going to talk about other issues, because it's great that we're in furious agreement about the need to preserve green wedges tonight. I don't think it's anything about what people want. I think if you ask people what they want, there's plenty of areas where people accept a reasonable amount of development. I mean, we've got activity centres in my council, Kingston. People accept 4 stories in the activity centre at Mentone. Not too many is being built. People accept 6 or 7 stories at Moorabbin Activity Centre. Not too much is being built. There's a beautiful area where the railway line's underground there, which could be built on. No one wants to build on it. There's the gasworks site. It's been empty for a decade. The state government spent $6 million remediating it. Developers don't want to build on it because why? Because they've got 43,600 hectares of green wedge land that's just been rezoned for them. They can pick and choose. You've got landholders who actually lobbied out in Trevor's area, lobbied to have their land rezoned. Now they find they can't sell it because the developers have just got land coming out of their ears. It's a real developers market. And I think the problem is, as Rob said, a lot of the new apartment blocks and probably outer suburban developments now are being built largely for offshore purchases. So people are buying bolt holes and then they'll come and apply for citizenship later. So it's not about, I don't think our planning policy's got anything much to do with what people want. And I guess I'd also say that as a councillor, I have people coming to mediation conferences every week, and they all say We don't disagree with development. We just don't want this overhanging our window, and we don't want the light blocked out here, and we don't want 6 stories, but we'd be happy with 4. So I just think people, people are quite reasonable actually when you sit down and talk to them. And I think the problem is that the government's planning policy is driven by what developers want, and we have seen a few examples of that recently. And I guess my question to you all is, how do we get the government to take the developer's hand off the wheel? Thank you.
I'm going to share an experience on that, Rosemary, about trying to do that. Some would have known I was in the Age a few weeks ago. I applied to join the State Liberal Party because their website says come and join it and challenge us and bring new views to the party. Well, seriously, that's what I said, and then I thought if you don't do it, they can say you've never done it. So I went and did that, got accepted. A few weeks later I'm out. I thought my last few I was out because Matthew Guy got involved. He won't admit to it, but we know it happened, and another House Member of Parliament, because they didn't like being challenged. So I think I'd like to see a message here. The governments of both sides, the former Labor Party, obviously met with us all and said all these lovely things, but then the next day turned around, and hence we got the current boundaries. We've got Matthew Guy now, a process, so you know, it's called the logical inclusion, which I call the illogical inclusions going through now. That should be announced in the next few weeks, which bits of land are going to be added now to increase the urban growth boundary yet again. All right. And so you go for all this, and as I said tonight, there's a new town centre being announced for summer, which no one knows about, and it's about 4 or 5 k's from the nearest railway station by the Growth Area Authority on an email tonight. But I think that the government are scared to listen to the community, and I've got enough records now for FI&I that if you're not a developer, you don't get listened to by councils, or you don't get listened to by the current governments. And somehow, hopefully that's why I came to this forum, is listen to people's views as well, and people power does change things, and I think there's a change, and I'm listening to some colleagues have said here tonight that a lot of the views here are very sensible ones. We do have lots of spaces still in Melbourne which we can put housing in or expand. The report last week, or a few weeks ago, we have 16,000 rooms or rental properties in Melbourne City at the moment that are empty. So there's plenty of space around. I just think the government needs to stop giving in to these developers and sit down around and talk to the community what's a better result for all.
I think one way you could get the developers' hand off the wheel is that I think the onus goes back onto local government. There are 26 odd of us who make up metropolitan Melbourne. I think local government needs to come together and actually do exactly what you said and point out where the development is acceptable to communities, and point out to the government, if you built in those areas, they might have to spend less on infrastructure, so they'd save themselves an enormous amount of money. You'd have the capacity over time to absorb the population that comes in, because going back to the gentleman before's question, I think the question is not how do we keep the population down, because I agree with Jane, I think that's going to be very difficult, but how do you make sure we use less as the population grows? And that's going to come down to putting people in and around where things are already, so you don't have to rebuild them. So I think there's a big challenge here for local government to sit down, and if all 26 municipalities got together and did a similar study that said, here's the capacity within our area, and that will give you X million houses for the next X number of years, why do you need to start going out into these other areas, and put some figures on them, which we've done in the report we did. And it's interesting, 1 million people added to the city, you'd save $110 billion if you didn't build on the fringe. So 110 billion, I think that's 4 broadband schemes, and we argued till we blew in the face about whether we want broadband. We could actually save that, we could have 4 of them. So I think there is an onus on local government to come to the table and actually connect up the dots.
Thank you. Now, we've got 10 minutes until we finish, actually 8 minutes, and we are going to finish on time. So if you'd like to ask a question, please put your hand up now. You see, now all the hands go. All right, the gentleman at the very back, we're going to get him to ask his question before his arm falls off. Then the lady down here at the front, and then on the right-hand side, on the back, those 2 ones that are waving. That's, I reckon, what we've probably got time for.
Paul Prentice, Friends of Merry Creek, whose grasslands are being threatened by the urban sprawl. I'm very disappointed to see the trivialisation of the population issue, as if you can't stop it except by sterilising all the women and stopping all immigration. Haven't you heard of Kelvin Thompson's 14-point plan to stabilise the population? abolish the baby bonus, give child support only to the first two children after a given time in order to promote the sustainable two-child family. Australia is on an unsustainable growth curve. We have got one of the highest per capita consumptions in the world, and therefore we should be, if anything, stabilising our population instead of compounding the error by combining high consumption with high population increase.
No, you're right. I was absolutely exaggerating to make a point, but because I think that there's something that just doesn't get talked about at all, which is the consequences of not growing the population. So I'm sorry if that came across as trivialising. No, but thank you for your point. So do you have a question or?
I don't know what the question would be, except that why hasn't anybody been talking about population, the basic issue that underlies all this? Why do people accept that Melbourne has got to grow when we know that the consequences will be bad environmentally and socially?
Again, in the early 1970s, I think people were saying the same thing, and Melbourne's twice the size that it was then. So again, I think there's more than one side to that. There's more than one perspective on that. Thank you very much. The lady down here on the...
I'm Margaret. I live near Royal Park and the Commonwealth Games Village. So we're in an area that's being hugely overdeveloped because, well, interesting government plans, but also because we live on a transport corridor. So there's no more trams, no more trains, no more safe road outlets, etc. My question is, why aren't developers forced to provide green space and also infrastructure prior to the development of the buildings?
I'll give you...
If you want to be very brief in that, I'm just aware that we haven't heard from...
I'll brief you because in my own life at the moment with council, they go in a joint venture with a developer. They don't pass title until the final development's finished, which means they avoid land tax. And the land tax there is meant to be for infrastructure. It's just one example. And so you've got the local councils in Bev, the developer, to avoid them paying land tax on a sale currently now, which is there, the government gets for infrastructure. And obviously we asked the Minister about that. But look, that's all been talked about quite a bit, but you're right. As I said at the start of my little spiel tonight, that infrastructure should be put in place before any development goes ahead. It's a common sense thing. Like the Geelong Ring Road, for example, has gone down. They've put that in before they do any work around the outer parts of Geelong. So they're planning.
The green spaces, because council keeps saying how important they are. You've even mentioned it themselves that they're slicing little bits off right, left and centre for development.
Yeah, I mean, developers will abide by the rules of the game, and so that's their job, right? It's well, exactly. We need to decide what it is that we want and set the rules of the game accordingly. Set up the incentives so that they can make money out of building what it is that we actually need, so they can do their job as well.
Look, I think an important point. I think that money should come up front, not at the end, because I think if you started to put the real cost on development on the fringe, it would be unaffordable. It's as simple as that.
Because the money goes into a magic little pool.
Not always.
It should be provided where that actual development is.
And there's schemes for that. For instance, at committee on Tuesday night, we discussed increasing the levy on developers to provide the open space we're going to need in central Melbourne. And that was voted through, and it will see an increase in the upfront contribution by developers to provide that.
The money has to go in that area. You look at the Commonwealth Games Village or down our road, there's no...
My apologies for interrupting.
But I agree with you, and the policy basically says that, and there's an open space strategy that goes with it, that shows where the open space is needed, and therefore the money will go to that. But I think, that there is a wider question than just the open space. I mean, we should have things like inclusionary zoning on affordable housing. Every new development that goes ahead should have a percentage of affordable housing in it, otherwise we'll never address the affordable housing problem.
That's what was happening at Commonwealth Games.
Okay,
I'm sorry. Going to laugh for it at the moment.
I'm just aware we've got 3 minutes, and I've promised 2 people at the back who might mug me on my way out if I don't let them speak. Can you sort of be brief, and I'll take you both at the same time, and then we'll have a very quick wrap up. Thanks.
Sure. Hi, my name is Melissa Grimes from Bicycle Network Victoria. Earlier on, the panel touched upon the case of Penalosa and Bogota. I guess my question for the panel is, how do we replicate that? How do we move away from an incremental approach towards that sustainable transformation and accelerated transformation towards healthy communities?
Thank you. And I'll take the other one just while we're there.
Thank you. Henk van Leeuwen. Apart from a more intense democratisation of local government, of course, and a planning overlay scheme where decisions are made and stuck with locally, inclusionary zoning, certainly, for the 50,000 units that are either built or on the plan now in the 3 inner urban areas, none of them, as far as I can see, is for families, and we ought to do what they do in European cities, afford 20, 25% or whatever through schemes whereby we actually create social housing and mix it in. And I think that is long and long overdue, and certainly this is the point well taken. Thank you.
Thank you. A last comment in particular, if you could address how is the revolution actually going to happen?
I think, and I know the lady's question wasn't directly on bicycles, but the revolution is happening. The bicycle usage has gone up since 2002 from about 2% to 10% of the commuters coming to the central city. The big challenge that I think we face as a city is how do we make it safe? Because until we make it safe, you're not going to get a whole lot of new participants in cycling. And that's watch this space. I think you'll see some announcements in the near future that will look at how you actually make bicycle commuting safe. And that goes to the core of, I think, the argument I've been trying to put across, is that piece of thing called the road is just a piece of real estate. At the moment, the most inefficient way of using that real estate is driving a car. So rather than actually building more roads, let's subdivide the real estate according to priority. And let's go about people past a point, not cars past a point. Bikes, peds, public transport first, cars last. And if we go that way, we won't have to build any more roads.
Fantastic. Thank you. Jill, the last word.
I really have to concur with all of those comments that Rob has made, and I think the headset in Melbourne, I reckon over the last 10 to 15 years, has really transformed. I think, the bicycle use is extraordinary and people out on the streets is extraordinary. And I think, I guess we just hope it all happens a bit faster.
Thanks. Trevor, 30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 seconds. We've got to maintain the green wedges and do the best we can to stop the ongoing expansion. The points made by my colleagues today even support that by more density in certain transit areas. But the only thing I will say from outer suburbs is that if you've got the ongoing conflict, the councils out there need income through their rates, and that's why they do these quick developments out there.
Thank you. I'm going to abuse my position by doing a quick advert for Grattan's next report, which is on cities and social connection, the next Grattan Cities programme, which we're publishing in late March. We're social animals and cities need to kind of take that into account as well. Can I thank everybody for coming along? It's fantastic to see so many people out and interested and such great questions. And can you all join me in thanking our panel?